Chapter 4. Hector shifted Chromefoot into park near the front door of the ocean greenhouse. The day was cloudy and muggy. Uniformed men and women were walking in and out of the open front door carrying chairs and tables into the house, while others exited on their way to grab more tables and chairs. He needed to use the restroom. It was a bit of an emergency situation. It usually was. "Would you like any help unloading, Hector?" Wonder was standing outside the car. Hector could smell the old wood and ancient furnishings from within the house. He liked the smell. "Anyone ever tell you that you look like a beetle?" "Yes, actually. Today you look like a beetle in a bucket cap," she smiled. "And please leave the bucket cap out of your attire this evening." Hector forced a polite chuckle and walked around Chromefoot to review the contents of the trunk. He grabbed 2 bags. Wonder walked over and grabbed a computer bag and another backpack. He was grateful for the help. The car would need a wash soon, and he felt the anxiety of a long overdue oil change and tire rotation. Hector knew he should be treating his car better than he was. Chromefoot was his closest ally. She dropped the bags at the bottom of the staircase inside. "You'll have to excuse me, Hector. I have to talk with the event manager. Come find me out back when you're done unloading. I've got some additional information for you about the lawn event this evening." After finishing up in the restroom, he spent the rest of the afternoon tidying the car and unpacking. The fresh paint of the 2 upstairs rooms was pleasant. He liked the old smell of the house, but there was a certain comfort he found in the smell of cleaning products and the aroma of fresh paint. The queen bed was set below wide windows facing the line of cypress trees on the east side of the house. There was a dresser and walk-in closet that was the size of the room Hector had when he was a kid. A bathroom was connected with his room, and this fortunate turn of events filled him with relief. Next door in the workroom, the space was smaller, but it would not be appropriate to refer to it as small. With a wooden desk and some bookshelves, it was warm with the afternoon's rising heat. There was a short file cabinet, and next to it, a portable cupboard that held assorted chargers and accessories for electronics. A larger monitor on the desk reminded Hector about his laptop and the workload that awaited him. There were 2 fake plants that contributed to the room's atmosphere with the relaxing presence that only plants and fake plants can provide. Small-scale blueprints were framed on the walls as well as an old photograph of Mr. and Mrs. Ocean Green standing next to the piano in the shade of the trees. Bert was holding Angela so closely that his white beard was nearly tangled with her short black hair. Out back he found Wonder standing in a sea of tables and chairs. The fresh pressed white and green tablecloths were gently rising and falling with the breeze. A man and woman were nearby arranging flowers in vases on the tables. Another man with a violin was seating himself in the gazebo. Wonder finished speaking with an overly professional coordinator before walking in Hector's direction with a wave. She wore a bright red dress and her blue cap. "Getting settled all right, I hope?" "Yeah, the 2 rooms are going to be perfect. They feel good." "I'm glad to hear it," she said with a pause that indicated she was short on time and needed to get to more important information. "We won't be needing any help setting up today, but as you know, you will have some duties at the event this evening with meeting the foundation members, donors, and various guests. They absolutely love getting to know our seasonal residents." "Can't wait," Hector replied while doing his best to hide any nervousness. Wonder lit a cigarette and smiled with a stern look before turning to walk away in the direction of the violinist. The sun dipped to a level just above the treetops. Out in the gazebo, a string quartet was tuning their instruments between banter. Hector had always wanted to play an instrument, but he didn't have the mind to sacrifice the time for anything outside of skateboarding. To play and practice at music was for someone else. Skateboarding was for Hector. For him, it was a childhood obsession with exploration and architecture that presented itself within the cloaked joy of pushing around Downey with his friends. His parents' home was blocks away from the convergence of 3 cities and 3 freeways. He started at a young age exploring the neighborhood strip malls and schools. Sometimes he'd do this alongside a group of friends, and often he'd search and explore alone. He stayed relatively close to his neighborhood, but on some occasions Hector would search for miles down the city sidewalks. If he or one of his friends caught word of a new spot to skate, he'd risk spending an entire Saturday on an expedition to get there. And he often found nothing that was worth revisiting, but that was fine too. The treasure he was looking for was often in schoolyards, parking lots, grocery store loading docks, college campuses, and vacant business parks. It was like searching for treasure hidden in plain sight. Once he started high school, his friends from junior high lost interest in pushing around. But Hector continued pursuing the skateboarding life, which led him to other individuals on the same path. With a license and a car, the world opened up once again. Days became drives to Long Beach, Hollywood, and downtown. Sometimes he had a specific destination in mind, other times there was no destination at all. Hours of sleep were lost. The desire to locate and enjoy the benefits of inspiring spaces and structures had taken hold of him. That's how it started, and with the passing of time, that's what led him to the life he was living. Finishing the knot in his necktie was the last detail needed for him to feel ready for the evening event on the back lawn. He'd assured himself that butterflies would not flutter in his stomach, but without fail they arrived around the same time they always did, when the responsibility of public speaking was within the hour. The trick for Hector was to not get lost in any visions of winning over the crowd with the charisma that he didn't have. Purple sky and pink clouds were in the high above, and the noise of the arriving crowd and the string quartet began to buzz throughout the house with increasing volume. Hector opened the windows in the office and the bedroom. Fresh air from the hilltop cooled his head. The rooms of the house sighed with a tone that said, "Our day is done, we're resting now." His nervous stomach bubbled a signal that a preparatory trip to the restroom would be needed before beginning his night. It was only a matter of time until his stomach created another disruption, and while he also considered stomach activity as a great option to utilize as an exit plan, he didn't want to risk his plan backfiring on him. This was a case where playing it safe was best. The west side of the house was suffocating from the day's heat, and he could hear the wood walls popping and adjusting as they cooled down. It was quiet and still in the old house. No one but Hector was inside, since the house and its furnishings were too worn down to be included in the evening's party. Outside, Hector was not free for long. Wonder called to him from the buffet line, "Hector, over here!" Hector thought to ignore the call and take a moment to clear his head, but it was too late. He was in the crowd now. Besides, the food at the buffet was trustworthy, and Hector was desperate for it. So he turned to move in the direction of Wonder's voice. "I'd like to introduce you to Dean Conti, one of the many committee members on our board that thought very highly of your submission materials." Dean was a retired professor from Iowa, now living locally and working as a consultant for a real estate firm. He looked nervous too, which Hector appreciated. "I'm Dean. Pleasure to meet you, Hector. Now, how are you doing with getting settled?" "It's been great so far, but to be honest, I just moved in this afternoon, so maybe ask me after a week of taking care of the place." "You'll do great. I read your paper, and I know you're going to do just great." And then there was a woman, thin-nosed and squinting, whose eyes moved excitedly before she spoke. "I'm Sarah. I'm on the board with these two wonderful people as well," she proclaimed with an exaggerated delivery of wonderful that caused her to laugh at herself. "And I just love your haircut." Hector continued nodding politely and thanking his lucky stars that he was back home, outside sweating in a suit in the dusk light of California. This was the night that mattered most, since so many of the perceptions about him would be based on his interactions throughout the lawn event. Hector strategized the frequency of his trips to the open bar. It was a game of fostering a manageable buzz to alleviate the tension brought on by the conveyor belt of event-goers and introductions. There were a few in the crowd closer to Hector's age. Like him, they were traversing the gala atmosphere, mixing in and out of the well-dressed crowd that had now grown in size to somewhere around 300 guests. The night air was warm. Garden lights produced a bright spot on an otherwise empty hill. An inflated moon was creeping up in the sky, and Hector was momentarily struck by its size. During a free breath between conversations, he wished it would remain that same massive size for its entire remaining arc. The quartet played a string rendition of a Debussy piano piece, "The Girl in the Flaxen Hair." He knew this piece. His dad would jokingly play its opening notes at the piano every time his mom returned from an appointment at the salon, or from getting her nails done. One thing Hector liked about Debussy was that he tended to name his pieces with actual names, not the naming convention of the older composers, who named their songs like math equations. One of the only music titles he knew of the math equation kind was St. George's Symphony in G Major, Op. 11, number 1 Allegro. He could remember this only because his parents played their own arrangement of this piece on most Sundays of his childhood in Downey. His father handling the prep of the violin and his mother stabbing the piano with strong hits that would bring the neighbors out into the street to listen. But more than any other piece, his parents played their version of the first movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, with his mother's piano subbing in for the symphony's guiding flute. He knew it better than any other piece of music, and as a child, Hector would ask his mom to skip to his favorite part, the fifth measure of the vivace section, which began around the 3-minute mark. When Hector regained his presence, wonder was in the gazebo, quieting the crowd as the strings came to a clean halt. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here with us to celebrate another great year for the Los Angeles Ocean Green Foundation, she announced before pausing to allow the crowd to clap. Hector looked around and listened to the whispered chit-chat happening amongst the polite clappers. The night is far from over, so consider this a formal welcome and by no means a goodbye, Wonder went on with impressive ease. Now I won't take any more time from what is needed tonight. Hector Alvarez, where are you? Hector raised his hand and was immediately surprised by his own voluntary gesture as Wonder went on. Would you please make your way over here and fast? As the crowd laughed at her demand, Hector lost the feeling in his arms and legs. He couldn't see any details on the faces across the crowd, and he did his best to avoid making eye contact with any of the audience. He felt himself nervously twitching his right leg and quickly stopped it with an overly obvious motion. Now Hector is a native Angelino, and he's been away from his home turf for the last 3 years up in the Pacific Northwest. Seattle, Washington, to be exact. 206, baby, a woman's voice called out from the crowd, causing some momentary confusion. He's the recipient of the Ocean Green Foundation's summer residency, and that means Hector will be living and working out of this beautiful home for the next 3 months. I would like to be the first to formally say, welcome, Hector. We look forward to working with you. The crowd clapped again. Friends, donors, colleagues, do yourself a favor and make sure you meet this talented young man before the night is through. She raised a narrow glass that caught the surrounding light at a satisfying angle. Cheers to all of you for your contribution and support, and cheers to another great year and an exciting summer ahead. The crowd raised their glasses with scattered cheers and applause. The moon continued its climb toward the top of the sky. Hector paused for a moment and thought about his parents and his drive from Seattle down the coast to LA. He thought about the perfect summer temperatures around him, and about the schoolyards and paved spaces he'd be tasked with writing about. Those empty spaces once frequented by his heroes. Then he was surrounded. It was the donors, the friends, board members, and colleagues of the event, and they were waiting to make his acquaintance. It lasted for what Hector thought had to be hours. All walks of LA life wished him well, with smiles and extended hands. There was the occasional hug and pats on the back from the huggers in attendance. The conversations usually landed on topics of Seattle rain and Hector's long hair. For this kind of thing it was easy enough, and he felt grateful to meet so many people that spoke to him with encouragement. Hector's stomach began to signal the need to find a restroom, and he quickly stepped away when the opportunity presented itself. He put his head down and walked at an uninterruptible pace into the house and upstairs. After meeting the initial needs of his bowels, he sat on the toilet scrolling through his phone until he forgot where he was. He hesitated for a moment just as he was about to step back into the evening event. Outside, beyond the tables and the crowd, his eyes adjusted, and he could see the full moon giving blue-lit details to the darkness. Without another thought, he stepped out to the empty hill space and walked under the moonlight. He listened as the music and buzz of the event crowd got further away until it was almost quiet. Crickets filled the blue-lit space with their vibrating chirps. Bushes shook briefly with the movement of nighttime critters. A bottle of beer in his hand dripped with condensation. He was grateful to be alone, and he sipped at the beer and enjoyed the feeling that it made in his tired body and mind. There was a large rock down the hill near Teresia's trees, and he thought to go sit on top of it. But then he was wise to remember how easily he'd fall asleep if he got lazy from the beer. He'd fall asleep anywhere after 9 p.m. if alcohol was mixed with any of solitary relaxation. Falling asleep on the rock would of course lead to his first night on the job coming to a confusing end. It would be especially confusing for whoever found him. He'd then spend the rest of his summer residency looking for opportunities to casually justify his rock sleeping actions. So the rock was not an option on this evening. He'd have all summer to rest there if he really wanted to. Hector explored the hilltop until he began to feel the pull of his responsibilities back in the crowd. While taking a final moment to enjoy the silence in the night sky, he heard what had to be the sound of dissonant piano notes from the tiny forest between him and the lawn event. He was paralyzed with the thought of this piano in the dark, but the childish notes being played were more humorous than anything. As he got closer, the messy notes continued to burst in staggered stabs and trills. He wandered across the blue-lit grass as a feeling of caution washed over him before stepping into the pitch blackness under the tree. Moving slowly under the tree shadows, he heard the rustling of more critters in the darkness. The opening in the trees allowed for some light from the full moon, and he could see two women sitting at the piano bench. They were whispering between hushed laughter, and the shadows from their hair foiled any chances of recognition in the dark. There was a bottle of wine sitting on top of the piano. They looked like giggling apparitions to him, and although he could not see her, one of them was giving immediate access to Hector's heart, whether he wanted to allow it or not. The noise of the lawn event had grown louder with the evening hours. Swift arrangements played out from the gazebo, and the collective banter of the attendees brought about something regal in the air. The city entered into those later hours when the power of summer allows for even the most tranquil individual to feel the desire to stay outside. After considering a few ways to address the girls at the piano, his mind went blank. Then came the realization that it would be best to avoid getting caught out in the dark by these women during his first night of the residency. Hector shifted from a desire to linger into a strategy of quietly retracing his steps and finishing out the night in high standing with wonder and the foundation. He turned, and with the first step he took to exit the area, clipped a fallen tree branch and fell to the black ground. The women paused and then laughed, mostly embarrassed for the unexpected visitor's mishap, and by the time Hector gathered himself, the women and their wine bottle were hidden in the shadows. "Hello," a voice called out from the darkness. Hector picked himself up from the dirt, only to stand frozen and indecisive in the dark. "Hello and good evening, kind sir or madam," the two women laughed to each other. "Would you like us to play a song? For you see, we're a traveling act, my sister and I, and we've come all the way across the country to play these humble tunes just for you." Hector remained silent in the dark. "So you," a raspier second voice giggled. "You, whoever you are, you know that it just gets creepier the longer you hide out there, right?" She then finished with an impression from one of Hector's favorite cartoons. "Who are you?" "Dude," laughed the first voice. "Just so you know, we got our pepper sprays and we will start spraying and yelling in about 3 seconds if you don't respond real fast." Hector was not prepared to call their bluff. "Do you take jazz requests, Bill Evans or Thelonious?" he asked from his side of the darkness. "I knew it! It's a dude, of course," the raspy voice laughed before going on. "How about you come out from where you're hiding and play us a song first, bud? If that will de-escalate the situation, then I'm open to it. But if I play a song, then you have to, play one as well. I can't just make a fool of myself for some voices in the dark." "Well, let's start with your song, and then we can negotiate," the raspy voice said lazily. "If you say so," he said, while stepping into the opening to sit at the piano. Hector knew how to get through some Bill Withers. It was simple enough chords, and he knew that even the more critical voice of the two women couldn't argue the validity of such a song choice. He mumbled the opening melody over the chords. For the first verse, it was easy enough until he lost track of the chord changes and melody, and he stopped shortly after botching an attempt at the second verse. The voices in the dark clapped and whistled in approval. "Not bad for a creep in the bushes," the sharper voice called out. But it was this sharp voice that enabled Hector to endure the discomfort in the games. "Oh, come on, would a creep know how to play Lean on Me under these circumstances? No lighting and a shit-tough crowd?" "Probably," the raspier negotiator laughed. "You probably just camp out back here waiting to do this routine for every wandering victim that comes along." "You know what I think? I think you're just stalling now." "Really, Bill? That was the deal, wasn't it?" he reminded them. "Yeah, but we lied," the raspy voice confirmed. "Hey," the sharper voice objected, "don't include me in this deal." "Are you kidding me? You're going to side with this guy?" the raspy voice bickered. "Calm down, I'm not siding with him, dude," the first voice laughed. Hector interrupted them once more. Okay, friends, I don't have all night to hear this traveling piano team's artistic differences, so let's wrap it up. How about some Debussy or perhaps Stravinsky? What do you got for me? Okay, look, we don't have any songs, bud, and plus, shouldn't you be back giving a toast at the big party anyway? Hector had been made. Okay, you win this round. We always win, the first voice confirmed with faux authority. I can tell, he agreed flatly. What do you mean you can tell, the first voice asked. Look, I'm going to head back. Would the one of you that's not being an asshole join me for a drink while the bar is still open? Wow, voice number 2 replied loud and drunk. Hector waited in silence before starting again. I mean, no offense, but it's clear one of you is not a fan, and at this point I'm just trying to prove I'm not a creep. Great pitch, number 1 teased. Alright then, I'll likely see you never, but it's a shame because you gotta admit this was kind of fun. How about another deal, voice 1 called out from the dark. As long as it doesn't involve the piano, I'll hear it. I'll follow you back for a drink, but you walk first and we'll be right behind you. But... Okay, let's hear it. You don't turn around until we make it back to the bar top. Deal, Hector replied immediately. Wait. There was prolonged whispering that Hector tried to decipher without any luck. Another moment passed and Hector resisted the temptation to push them to hurry along with him. He heard cracking branches and wondered if the 2 women were attempting to sneak off. My sister is out, the voice number 1 announced, so it's just going to be me. But if I'm not back in 2 minutes, she's bringing people back here. Not ideal, but given the timeline, we'd better start making our way pretty quick here. And I have an additional question. Okay. We can still talk while we walk, right? Even though I'm not turning around? Well, no, talking is against the rules. Wasting no time, Hector turned his back to the piano and raised a hand that announced the beginning of his departure. He heard a branch snap against the turf of the small forest's floor behind him. Before taking his first step back into the dark, he was startled by the sound of her voice close behind him. If you turn around, I'm gone. He exaggerated a nod, knowing there was hardly enough moonlight for her to recognize the gesture. Now lead us through the shadows, darling. With pleasure, he replied. He took careful and slow steps into the dark. She placed a warm hand on his shoulder. I can't afford to fall in this dress. Sure thing, he confirmed. Then, moving with slow and careful steps between the trees, the light from the event on the lawn began to help with identifying a safe path. I like how careful you are, her voice uttered behind his right ear. Event lights met Hector's steps like ocean tides reaching up to the shore. Her hand was no longer situated on his shoulder, but he knew she was close. It was all much more regal than it had been when he'd exited the event earlier, and summer wildness was in the firmament. The quartet was gone and their string arrangements were replaced by large speakers playing the more contemporary selections that produced scattered dancing across the grass. One of the first guests they encountered was a bald man, sweating and dizzy, cooling down with a glass of water and the help of his patient wife. Beyond the recovering gentleman, Hector marked a clear path through the tables and chairs to the agreed-upon destination. A Brenton Woods song began to play loudly, but Hector couldn't remember the name. He liked this walking to the bar game more with each step as they traversed the event crowd, and a recklessness took hold of him as he fought the desire to turn around and kiss her. So, am I good, he asked. This question did not get a response, so he asked again to avoid a breach of their contract. Can I turn around now, or do I really have to wait until I have the drinks in my hand? Plus, I don't even know what you want. Red wine? He asked, looking up to the moon above. No answer again. He stopped just before reaching the short line circling the portable bar top. After assessing the situation, he decided he couldn't possibly get in any trouble for turning around, especially since he'd clearly arrived at the specified location. Hector gave one more warning, doing his best to respect the rules of a game that was now losing its novelty. When he turned around, there was no one behind him. It was an empty pathway of grass leading to the center of the dining tables and dancing. The moon was at the top of the sky, and the air was finally cooling. He thought to wait in line for a much-needed beverage, but the growing frustration from the game led him away from the drink line and back inside the house. Like all of his first days on a new job, this one left Hector exhausted.